Hi, I'm Steph. I'm Annika's roommate.
Hi, I'm Angela. I'm Monica's friend.
I'm Pam, Annika's friend.
All right, so in 1932, Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World, which was essentially a science fiction novel about what it would be like societally if we were able to genetically engineer humans. So that wasn't possible back then, but recently, due to technology such as CRISPR-Cas9, which was developed in 2013, we actually have the ability to create the biological side of this dystopian world. So even though the mechanisms of this topic are extremely complicated, its ramifications could easily change humankind's entire existence. So have you ever wondered what it would be like if you could get rid of a gene that predisposes you for certain diseases like breast cancer? Or what if you could choose your child's eye color? Actually, this is really easy to do with the current technology that we have. I've even done it in the research I did this summer. It's actually really frequently used in research and preclinical trials where you use isolated human cells and alter these and then just not put them back in a human. So a researcher recently showed that it's actually possible to edit DNA of non-viable human embryos. So therefore we can infer that we can also edit viable human embryos. So although genome editing is an exciting development in science, it's imperative that all citizens understand its implications, which include one gene having unknown effects on other genes, genetic changes being passed down throughout the generations, and the exacerbation of social stratification due to these artificial genetic changes. So the first of these is that editing one gene can have downstream effects on other genes. So genes are constantly interacting. An example of this is that one gene, if it's heavily expressed, it can completely silence another gene. And then that gene can then silence another gene. So essentially gene A could silence gene C through a cascade. So because there are so many different genes in the human genome, and we don't fully understand how all these genes interact and how they affect one another, it's really risky to edit gene A because we don't know how it's going to affect gene F. And if we make a change to the genome and something goes wrong, the error doesn't just go away. It's actually permanent, and it ends up getting passed on to future generations. So essentially, if you're editing my genome, you're editing my child's genome. And then it's further amplified because then you're editing my grandchild's genome, and the next thing you know, you've got hundreds of people with an error. So in addition to that, you're making a genetic choice for your kids that they might not want. So now that we've looked at the biological side of genome editing in humans, we need to address the social and societal consequences. The hugest of these is the intensification of social stratification due to artificial gene editing. So the International Summit for Human Genome Editing issued a statement in 2015 acknowledging that there is a possibility that permanent genetic enhancements to subsets of the population could exacerbate social inequities or be used coercively. So the first thing that pops into my mind when I hear this is Hitler and the Aryan race. So essentially he wanted to create one race of people that all had blonde hair and blue eyes. Back then you had to breed people with blonde hair and blue eyes with people with blonde hair and blue eyes in order to ensure that you got a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child. But now you can genetically engineer a human embryo and make this way easier. And this opens up the door for genocide and just racial inequality as well. So overall, there are a lot of ethical risks to editing the human genome. Two of these are biological. Those are editing one gene having downstream effects on other genes, and then those changes being permanent and being passed down to future generations. And then from a social standpoint, we've got intensification of social stratification due to artificial genome editing, which is obviously a huge issue, especially in the culture that we live in today. So the International Summit for Genome Editing that I mentioned earlier, in that statement that I also mentioned, they kind of set a precedent for what genetic engineering should be allowed. And they believe that it should never be allowed in human embryos due to the current state of science that we're in. And actually, the creator of one of the genome editing tools, CRISPR-Cas9, that I mentioned earlier, she said that I and my colleagues have called for a global pause on any clinical use of genome editing technology in human embryos. So she acknowledges that there's a severe risk. So in the meantime, it's our responsibility as citizens to stay up to date and be intellectually responsible for the impacts of human genome editing. And here are my note cards.